Okay, Liz, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to STC's Knowledge Exchange. I'm Liz Pohland, STC CEO and moderator for our panel today. Today's session is on conquering your TechComm fears and failures. If you feel failure, you are not alone. In honor of Halloween today, we will be discussing common fears within the field of technical communication. Our panelists will share some common pitfalls from their own careers and experiences, and we will highlight a couple of well-known technical communication failures from the past and discuss what was learned from each event. The panel will also highlight how fears and failures can be catalysts to success. I'm joined today by Aaron Galilee, Director of Operations, Membership and Community Relations, and our distinguished panelists. I'm going to introduce them while Aaron prepares a poll for attendees. We'd like to find out who's here today, and it kind of helps us tailor our responses or our discussion to who's in the room. But I'd also love it if everyone who's here would put a fear or failure in the chat that they have, especially a workplace fear or failure, but you're welcome to tell us you fear snakes or whatever. But we'd be curious to see what you all have as fears. So here are the bios of our panelists. Dr. Guiseppe Getto is an associate professor of technical communication at Mercer University, and he is president and founder of Content Garden, Inc., a UX content strategy consulting firm. He consults with businesses and nonprofits from a variety of industries who want to develop better content, better SEO, better user experiences, better writing, better designs, and better reach for their target customers, clients, and donors. He has taught at the college level for nearly 20 years. This is why he is wearing his academic regalia. During that time, he has also consulted and formed research and service learning partnerships with many nonprofits and businesses, from technical writing firms to homeless shelters to startups. He is also a poet, and his first book, Familiar History, is available from Fishing Line Press. So welcome, Guiseppe, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
My other panelist is Christina Mayr, who is a technical writer, information architect, outspoken user advocate, and champion for the technical writing profession. Currently leading a small team of technical writers in an IT organization within the gaming industry, Christina prides herself on leading and coaching others to improve their skills in technical communication. Her professional interests include technical content strategy, content operations, and leadership. After receiving her MA in Technical and Professional Communication from East Carolina University, Christina works as a technical writer on technology-focused teams for various industries, including electronics, manufacturing, pharmaceutical R&D, web application development, and networking hardware and software. In addition to her full-time job, Christina is also an instructor with Duke University Technical Writing Certificate Program. And both Guiseppe and Christina also teach courses for STC. She's served as an STC volunteer leader, presenter, intercom author, chapter president, and mentor, and she's won several awards from STC competitions. So welcome, Christina, and thank you for being here.
Happy to be here. You just missed my Charlie Brown husband. Luckily, he's got the cap off.
I saw the blur.
I saw the yellow shirt.
The yellow.
Great. So I don't see a lot of fears in the chat. If people wanted to put that in, maybe they couldn't do that while the poll was running. Aaron, can you share the results of the poll? Okay, great. So we have a lot of people who are current members, and this is going to happen all throughout our today's panel where my light goes off in my office. It's spooky for Halloween. We have a lot of new to recent TechComm folks, but also some people who've been in the industry a long time. Nice, diverse group. So that's very helpful. Great. Okay, well, thank you for filling that out. So I'd like to start today by just defining fear. Fear is an emotion that we feel based on the belief that we are in danger. Some fear is healthy, such as the fear that comes from seeing a rattlesnake, which prompts you not to go near it or to stay away. That's rational. That's your survival instincts kicking in. However, there are other types of fear that, simply put, are not as rational and don't really serve a purpose. Some irrational fears include things like fear of authority figures, speaking in public, flying on an airplane. Other fears are more subtle and harder to detect, such as fear of failure, rejection, or loneliness. However, whether our fears are subtle or obvious, most of them are irrational and we experience them on a regular basis. But if you have some fears, don't be ashamed of them. We all have them. And just to get started today, I would like to ask Giuseppe and Christina to share one thing that scares them or one professional or personal failure. And I'll start with Giuseppe.
Yeah, so I'm dressed this way because as we were talking about before the panel started, this is how people perceive, people like me who are college instructors. But actually, this is nothing like what I'm really like. I'm not like a medieval monk. I'm actually, on the academic side of TechComm. And so that means that not only am I responsible for educating people in TechComm and introducing them to the field, but I have to know what's going on in the field. And I'm not a full-time practitioner. I'm kind of a part-time practitioner, but still, I'm not like Christina. I'm not every day facing these challenges. And so for a lot of academics and a lot of people getting into the field, which is what I'll kind of discuss, imposter syndrome is a big problem for us. And imposter syndrome, they've actually done research and they've found that the more educated you are, the worse imposter syndrome you have, conversely, right? So I thought when I got my PhD, I'd be done learning and I'd have everything squared away and I could just go teach. Well, that hasn't been the case. I've learned more since getting my PhD than I did while I was getting it. So that's my main fear is being called out as an imposter.
And I think that makes a lot of sense. The more you learn, the more you realize you don't know.
Exactly.
Because it's so big, much bigger than you first knew.
That's
Christina,
exactly
how about you?
It's funny. I had the opposite of imposter syndrome when I was first starting out, and I armed with my master's degree, newly minted. I thought I knew everything, and I was ready to just take on the documentation world. And I go back and I look at my early deliverables in my portfolio, and I hang my head in shame because I'm like, this is really bad. And if I had to redo it, I would know what to do now. So I had overconfidence, I think, going in. But a real fear of mine was actually public speaking, and it feels rational because you're afraid of getting rejected. You're afraid of people laughing at you. But I will tell you that just by stepping up with STC gave me the confidence to present and be a leader. And the more I did it, the easier it got. And I recently gave a presentation to 1,500 people. So I have no problem speaking in public now. I still get nervous, but I can do it.
Yeah, I still get nervous too, but I think that nervousness now is like adrenaline and it gets me more excited for the presentation than, nerves about, am I going to mess this up? Because we also learned to prepare so that we wouldn't mess up, right? Okay, so let's talk about from your experiences, both working with students and being in the professional world. What are some common fears that technical communicators face? Can you each provide maybe 3 examples? And Christina, I'll start with you. And I see some people are putting some in the chat too.
Yeah, I work with a lot of career changers, and they typically come from other backgrounds, education backgrounds, work backgrounds. And the 3 that I get the most are not being a good enough writer. They don't write creatively. They didn't have an English degree. They haven't spent a whole lot of time writing, but they like the tech and they like what we do. So they feel like their writing isn't up to par, and then they can be a little bit nervous about that. Conversely, I see people who are strong writers, but are afraid they don't know the tech, and therefore they can't get a job as a tech writer because they're writers first and their technology is secondary. And people always ask me, would you rather hire programmer or a writer? And I always say I'd rather hire a strong writer and they can learn the tech. That's how I manage and that's how I teach. So you can learn anything if you try. If you're curious and you're willing to try and click buttons and break things, then this is the right job for you, or it could be the right job for you. The other fear I see is, oh my goodness. And now I've lost my third one that I was supposed to talk about.
I think it was tools, right?
Oh, right. Yes, thank you. Along with the tech, right? So maybe you're not strong in like coding or programming or anything technically out there that requires additional subject knowledge. There's also the authoring tools that can be hard to learn and hard to approach because A, you don't know what they are. B, they're not really free. and they're hard to learn, and it's best to learn on the job. So when I teach tools, I choose to teach accessible tools and systems that will give you a flavor for how we author, whether it's structured authoring with FrameMaker or Flare or Dita, or unstructured writing with Word or Google Docs. Having those foundations can open the doors to other tools that are a little more complicated. And nobody's expecting you to know everything. They're expecting you to be able to learn quickly, get up to speed, and have some idea of how these tools work and what they're used for.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I've definitely heard all of those before. And I think along with the tech, it's also the subject matter of that they may be writing on that it's unfamiliar because they got a job in an industry where they aren't the experts, but they're those people in the organization that you can rely on. So there is a backup for that. Giuseppe, how about you? Some examples you can give?
Yeah. So besides facing this myself, I also deal with a lot of people who have imposter syndrome. So I'm usually the person that is seeing Christina when they're in their master's degree, right? So they're just getting that credential, or most people do not come to TechComm. We have undergraduate degrees now. We did not for very long, but most people just don't end up learning about it until later in life, right? So there's a lot of people that go back to school, they seek out a credential, the STC credential, graduate credential, something, and then I see them trying to figure out what this field is, right? And it's a lot of what Christina talked about. It's a lot of, okay, I've never worked in a software development company, for example, so I don't know about that. I've never even heard of these authoring tools. I don't know the best practices in this field. And, what I tell them is I say, that's a lot of people. So, I talk about, there's thousands of people in this country who are working as de facto technical communicators, but they don't even have that job description. I meet people all the time who come to the STC Summit and they say, oh, I've been doing this for 10 years. I didn't even know this was a field. So there's a lot of sort of flattened knowledge in this field where there's a lot of people. I think the important thing is that you have a passion for communication and doing it really well. I think if you that's what I tell them. I'm like, if that's you, if you're a good communicator, then you can find a place in this field. And another fear that I get is the education versus experience, which is just, I think anybody that's in school or early career faces, right? Well, I've taken these classes, I've got this credential, but I don't have any actual experience, And to those people, I usually, tell them the fake it till you make it mantra. We're, again, a lot of people, if you flip the script on this and you do, you interview people who are longtime members of a field like TechComm, you'll find that they're still learning all the time. They're constantly, there's a saying in this field, it's like, if you don't know, Google it and figure it out, because we're not a field where you can just sort of download all your essential skill sets on day one, do your training, and then just do that for 30 years. You'll always hit obstacles that you need to solve. And so you can do that when you're starting out. Don't know that authoring tool? Download a free copy. These companies want you to learn their tools. So download a free copy, find a nonprofit or someone else that you can do some documentation for and do some stuff, practice it. If you're taking courses, make those, things, ways to learn the best practices that you need, that you're seeing in those jobs. And then that goes along with a portfolio. So that really terrifies a lot of people. The idea of having a portfolio to the degree where I've met people who have writing samples, but they don't want to put them in their portfolios. They don't think they're good enough. And I'm saying, okay, think about this. You either have a resume with no samples, or you have a resume and you have writing samples, which is better, right? Taking someone's word for it. Oh, I know how to do this stuff, or actually here's some examples. And yeah, you want to put your best foot forward, but as Christina, talks about in our STC class, those writing samples do not have to be all technical documentation. Right? They could be a really good essay you wrote, a really good article for the internet, a blog article for some professional, venue. You could write something for Intercom, for example. And the great thing about that is it shows diversity. It shows that you're a flexible writer. And that's really what these companies want to see, because what they don't want is to put somebody in a position in TechComm and then find out we need to train you how to write, because companies don't know how to do that. Writing is still one of the #1 threshold skills across positions, not just in TechComm. And it's one of the things that most employers say, we don't know how to teach this. So if you come in and you're not good at writing, so showing that in a portfolio gives you a huge advantage, because you're showing, look, I can string a sentence together. Like I'm this person, you know, I'm a writing nerd. I can figure this out. And that's, I think, the most important thing. So there's solutions to all these fears, but it makes sense why these fears exist.
Yeah, and that leads us into my next question, which is, how do you take a fear and turn it around into a solution? What do you do if you don't know the tech or the tool, or if you have imposter syndrome? You know, what advice do you guys have? And I also see a question in the chat about what free authoring tool can we download and practice with? So if you know of one, could you mention it in your response? Christina, I'll start with you.
Well, anyone who's just starting out, I recommend a tools progression thusly. Word, get really, really comfortable with Word. That's styles, document properties, headers and footers, cross references, figures and captions and tables. Okay. You get really good at designing a document in Word. You can then move on to something a little more sophisticated. So you could choose FrameMaker, or you could go to Get Flare. My recommendation is Flare, because I see a lot of people asking for that in their job adverts. And then when you're comfortable with Flare, which has a 30-day trial, by the way, or 90 if you're a student. So if you are a student and you would like a 90-day license, please reach out to me. I have a contact for you. And then once you're really comfortable with Flare, you can get some output from there, nice looking PDF or web help. Then you can move into Ditta. Oxygen also has a 30-day license. Ditta you can do for free. You do not need a tool to do Ditta. You can do Ditta in Notepad with the Open Toolkit, but you need to be comfortable with structured authoring and what that means. LearningDitta.com is a free resource for you to go and learn Ditta. I highly recommend it. But I would just say start with Word. One of my philosophies about life is it's better to know than not know, and that can go for almost anything. So I was on a work project recently, and the product we were about to buy required Google Cloud Platform, which is Google's alternative to AWS. And AWS, if you don't know, is cloud computing, serverless, virtual servers where people do a lot of software development in the cloud. Okay, so Google has a product that's very similar. So I went to Google's Google Cloud Platform's website, and they had free training available. So I was like, well, if anybody's going to be an expert in this, might as well be me, because I'm going to have to document the thing. So I just started taking their class. And for me, it's better for me to know, even if I don't go all the way through the class, go through all the details and I become GCP certified or whatever, at least completing the introductory courses allows me to feel better about what it is I'm getting ready to learn and write about for my job. So if I don't know something, I'm going to take it by the horns and just figure it out. And with brute force and whatever resources I can find. Sometimes I'll talk to somebody who's done it. I'll take a class, I'll read a manual, but that's a lot of what our job is taking the unknown and making it known for ourselves first before we can make it known to our users.
Yeah, that's great advice. And someone asked if you would mention again that last Ditta resource that you spoke of.
Yep, learningditta.com. I threw it in the chat.
Perfect. So Giuseppe, how do you recommend overcoming some of the fears you mentioned?
Yeah, so, again, a lot of it, I encourage a fake it till you make it approach, because what hiring managers in TechComm are looking for, and I think it goes with any communication focused technical field, they want to know that you can do the process, whatever that process is. So in technical writing, for example, there's a process. When you get ready to create a new piece of documentation, there's certain steps you need to go through. So as Christina has said, the tools, the exact subject matter knowledge is less important than you being able to say, okay, first, I'm going to analyze my audience. Then I'm going to go and I'm going to collect all the information I need and get the knowledge together. And then I'm going to format it in some way, and then I'm going to publish it. So when you can do that process outside of a job. I've had mentees that go work with a nonprofit and create documentation for a nonprofit. I've had mentees go and just find a tool online, even that already has documentation, and go through that process. Maybe document for, I encourage people, document for your grandparent, right? Take a tool that they're struggling with, like Zoom, and create documentation that they can understand. That really shows an attention to audience. It shows that you know how to document something in a very simple manner for somebody that's not proficient with it. And you can put that in your portfolio. And then, as Christina said, and I said in the chat as well, these companies that run these authoring tools, they want you to learn them, right? They put tons of free training online. And if you're a student, Madcap Player has a particular, again, Christina and to less degree myself, have a relationship with Madcap Player, we can get you a longer license. But a lot of companies do that. If you really want to learn some data tool like Oxygen and you're a student or an early professional, reach out to the company. They will give you tons and tons of resources, because what they want is you to learn that tool and then go get a job and then convince your company to buy their tool. So it's in their best interest to do that. But that's a great opportunity, because compared to something like Python, right? I mean, Python, there's tons of free resources too, but you're not going to get this like hands-on, this company that's like giving you tons of resources and putting you in touch with people and doing webinars. Madcap Player, for example, has tons of webinars, classes, you name it, to help you learn their workflows. And that's the thing, you really have to jump in and be a self-starter in this field, because this stuff is not familiar to anybody outside the field. It's not like, we have kindergartners that are playing around with Madcap Player like they're now playing around with the Adobe Cloud, And so everybody, again, is kind of in the same boat. And, fake it till you make it. You got to just go and practice stuff. And then once you become proficient in something, put it in your resume. You don't have to be Christina with 15, 20 years of experience to put it in your resume. If you've learned it well enough that you can get started with it, I tell people, put it in your resume. That's a skill set that you own.
Yeah. I also want to highlight the difference that you didn't really explicitly say, but you alluded to, Giuseppe, which is the difference between a commercial product and open source. If you are learning a commercial product like Flare or Oxygen, you have all these resources at disposal because you have people who are paid to make those resources available. But if you are targeting developer docs, for example, and you start going in GitHub and you go to try to learn GitHub is a free product. Yes, they have a paid version, but Git is totally open source and free. So you're going to have to do a lot more work to find those resources, because no one's going to really amalgamate them for you. That's because it's not their job. But that is the nature of open source. It's kind of everywhere all the time. And you just have to do a little bit more work to find what you're looking for. But it is still doable. But it's free. So it's a trade-off.
With open source, you have a lot of user groups, right? Where you can ask questions and share information. So it's more user-generated documentation in a way. I think you both mentioned something that I also always tell people when they tell me they're afraid of something, is to force yourself to do it, which you've both alluded to as well. If you're afraid of public speaking, really the only way to get over it is to go out there and do it and do it and do it till you're not afraid of it anymore, and it becomes second nature. Same with any other fear I think that you've mentioned. But that's the hard thing, right? Is forcing yourself to go out and put yourself in those situations. But as Giuseppe, you mentioned, you got to be a self-starter if you're interested in this field. No one's going to hand you the answers. So you have to be inquisitive and curious, I think, too. Okay, so one of the other questions I want to ask you guys is whether or not you think there are any new workplace fears as a result of the pandemic. So things that have only come up in the past couple of years. Giuseppe, I'll start with you.
Yes, so I think there are several. Something I'm getting, which is interesting to me, is that, I started using video conferencing, I don't remember when, but at least 10 years ago, right? Because academic job interviews, even then, way before COVID, this is the easiest way to do them, right? I've got 21-year-olds right, who have never opened Zoom before coming to a university, right? Because that's not the way they communicate. So there's there's a different type of communication that happens here, right? It's not the same as face-to-face, and it's also not the same as what they're familiar with, which is social media or texting, right? So there's a different kind of professional etiquette to communicating online and working in a team, right? Which is a lot the norm now. You're in a video conference call with a cross-functional team, a bunch of different skill sets, and you got to manage that. That's really hard for people that have not done that before. So that's a fear that I see a lot of. I also see a lot of, I don't know if it's a fear, it probably is driven by fear, but there's a lot of people that are coming to me right now saying, oh, can I just work online now? Can I just never go into an office again? And part of that is, I think, fear of COVID, but a lot of it is just like they see these memes online where it's like, oh, everyone's working from home now. Well, that's not necessarily the case. I'm not working from home, right? And the people that are working from home, it's kind of incidental, right? It's because their company kind of went into lockdown and decided, well, sure, you can just stay there, but it's not guaranteed. And so, and also working from home takes a different know-how than working in an office. Like I tell people that are early career, working from home may not be the best thing for you because it's hard to motivate yourself. It's easy to get distracted and you're missing out on the company culture. So we've actually had some, at Mercer University, we had some students who did their internships this summer, and a lot of the companies were in lockdown. So they had to do virtual internships and they didn't like it. They didn't get to learn the company culture as much. They had to communicate with all their team members like this. And they said it was really hard to do that, especially during the summer when there was no structure. So again, it's not so much a fear as a barrier. So if you're good at, doing virtual stuff, I know lots of people that are doing it and doing it well, great. But when you're first starting out, it may be more trouble than it's worth, honestly.
Yeah, I think that fear of missing out is a big thing because since COVID and working from home, there are a lot of people who don't get the same experience with their colleagues that they're, used to have and don't always know what's going on if they're not in the office. So I think a hybrid is a much better kind of more healthy for human interaction.
That's right, 100%.
Situation.
Yeah.
And also if you're very introverted or not someone who's as comfortable around other people, it's not necessarily good for you to be stuck at home all day. That doesn't help you conquer a fear that you may have.
No.
So Christina, how about you? Or have you seen some COVID related fears?
Well, I was going to say putting on real pants, but Giuseppe stole my thunder. In all seriousness, no, I think I'm starting to see a lot of people having a hard time actually finding a job. Okay, so we've had 2.5 years of virtual work. It's starting to change. People are going into the office more. I'm in the office 2 days a week. Technical writing, for the most part, can be done virtually. And with this complete resurgence of virtual work, you also have more competition, right? You have competition with people from all around the world who can do what you do for half the price or less, and maybe good as quality. So you're not just competing with the people in your region, you're competing with qualified people from all over the world, which can be a lot harder if remote is a deal breaker for you. It's super hard for people outside the US. I'm not saying it's equal, but it is harder for people in the US because there is so much more competition. You have a lot more people applying. You've got to really stand out in your resume and your application materials. And honestly, knowing somebody and networking into this field is a lot more important these days because your reputation, your virtual presence, and someone who can vouch for you is going to be super important in a virtual environment. Not to mention, I have starting to see people what they're calling overemployed, so people who have more than one job. And this is very common with software engineers and people in tech who are literally doing 2 40-hour job or more per week. So having that that credibility of, you are who you say you are, for one, and you can do the job. And you're not actually doing it for other companies as well, is becoming more important too.
Yeah. During one of our last knowledge exchanges, we talked a little bit about the fact that there are people posing out there as other people and applying for jobs, and not when they actually get the job, they aren't who they said they were online because there wasn't an in-person interview, et cetera. So it's a little different.
A little spooky.
Yeah.
I see that on askamanager.org, which is like my favorite workplace resource. If you don't know who Ask a Manager is, just start today. You'll go in the rabbit hole for years and years. She's been around a long time.
That's great. Thank you for that resource. So let's talk about a couple of the more infamous or well-known failures in communications that I know each of you has an example that we can talk about today. Guiseppe, I think let's start with you.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the big one, which is COVID, just because I've obsessively followed it for several years. Now, I am not a medical communicator. However, my wife is a nurse, so I've heard lots of stories, and I've talked extensively with a very well-known medical communicator in the STC community you may have heard of, named John Hedke, and his experiences with this. So essentially, one of the biggest failures, according to John and people that are medical communicators, first of all, there was a fundamental misunderstanding of audience, right? So I'm not going to talk about the QAnon folks, and I mean, what are you going to do with that, right? I'm not going to talk about the failures of the audience. I'm going to talk about the failures of communication from official sources, because that's what TechComm is, right? It's communicating to an audience, often from official source. So there was all this knowledge that was developing, right, early on. There was all this information that was coming into all these official channels. But what these communicators, at the federal level, the state level, every level really did not understand was that your average person does not understand the way those information sources work, right? So the biggest thing I heard from just friends and family members is like, why do they keep changing their mind, right? They say one thing, then they say another, because, that's the way science works, right? That's the way when you're dealing with a pandemic and things are developing, as new information comes in, you're going to change what the best practice is, right? And so a good, an example of trying to combat this stuff that I really saw, and I've lost, what major nonprofit put this out, but some major, medical nonprofit might have been, I don't want to say St. Jude's because they focus on cancer research, but it was, of that caliber. They put out a series of infographics, right? And each little infographic would take on a different sort of misinformation piece on COVID. And one of them I saw, for example, was, okay, why hasn't COVID gone away yet? And they started by saying, well, it turns out that, the flu pandemic of 1918, it never went away either. It's still with us. It just stopped being deadly. So they talked about the difference between something being a pandemic and being endemic, meaning it's still around, but it's not as deadly. We've got it under control. And, that attention to audience, understanding that the average person does not know the difference between a pandemic and an endemic, does not know that the 1918 flu never went away, right? There's a huge knowledge gap with the public that I think a lot of officials did not understand. They didn't have clearly technical communicators going in and saying, okay, here's where your audience is. Your audience is over here, and you're communicating from this. So how do we bridge that gap? And that's what I think this field does so well, right? We take, here's the complex technical knowledge, here's where the audience is, or here, they're not connected to this knowledge. How do we make that connection? What do we need to do? Does it need to be an infographic, right? Does it need to be, my favorite form of misinformation was there were all these, viral posts on social media where someone would actually take a quote from like the NIH, right? And they would take it out of context and make it sound like it meant the opposite of what was intended, right? So they're taking this technical knowledge they clearly don't understand. They're saying, you see, they're saying that it was developed by China right here in this quote, right? Again, this huge knowledge gap. And so how do you bridge that? And it was just, there was failure at so many levels. And again, John has literally written a whole book on this, not on COVID per se, but on medical communication. So he's somebody to talk to if you're interested in learning more. But for me, that was one of the big failures that really could have used our field big time.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think infographics were one of the things that I went to look for to make it more understandable, because when the scientists would get up with President Trump and discuss things and he would refute what they were saying right there on TV, I was like, I need a better source that I can understand. And I will say even STC struggled with announcements about what to do for the conference, for example, changing to a virtual. We had to make decisions really early on, and everyone thought, we were making the wrong choices, or, we were being too strict, but we really did think about it and look at the information we had, and then use those resources, the CDC, the local state government, to make decisions about what we would do too. So thank goodness there are sources like those that you mentioned out there that are trying to bridge the gap for information on COVID. So that's a great example. Thank you. Christina, what example did you bring?
Well, mine is not health related, but legally related. So I was Googling, I was looking for a specific lawsuit that I knew about, the serial or the Oxford comma being omitted, creating, money and issues down the road. And what I found was actually there is at least half a dozen lawsuits in the world centered around either the misplacement or the omission of a serial comma, and how that creates legal ambiguities and costs companies money. The most recent one I found was actually out of Maine. In 2014, there was a dairy farms or a dairy manufacturer's contract for their employees had an omission of a serial comma, and it created issues for their employees. So there was a class action lawsuit that was actually just recently settled. And each person that named on the class action was awarded $5 million because they were owed back pay, essentially. But I will tell you historically that there's two of my favorites. The first one is the Mariner mission that was to Venus. I think it was Venus. They were trying to go to Venus in 1962, but they could not because there was an omission of a hyphen in the code that was missed. And this one little hyphen caused everything to blow up, and they couldn't even launch. Not literally blow up, but like nothing would start. So proofreading is super important, and people are paid to do it for a reason. My other favorite one is that Chile misspelled their own country's name on their peso and had to remint the peso. So funny to me. So proofreaders earn their money.
They certainly do. And that just goes to show you that technical communication needs to be in every field, in every industry, that there are places where good communication, we see an example in the chat, can cost lives. It really does have an impact on, how we survive or don't, or how things are done. So thank you. I'll ask the attendees if they have any questions for the panelists to please put them in the chat. We will certainly address them now. But my last question for you guys, which I don't always get to, but I'm glad I'm going to today, is you've both been longtime STC members. What benefits are your favorites? And what benefits do you recommend? And I know you're going to say education because that's obvious, but would you recommend for people who maybe have some fears of technical communication or are trying to get into the field and not sure where to start? Giuseppe, how about you?
So, one thing I tell people a lot, which is, very low cost with your STC membership, is join a community, You
stole mine.
Join, so my experiences, particularly with STC Carolina, which I was around for years and years, I just moved to Georgia, but I'm still connected to them. And because a lot of these communities now, they're virtual, right? They represent a region, but if you're, no one in the Carolina community has told me that because I'm in Georgia, I can't be a member anymore. I'm still a member. So, and that kind of culture is really great with the STC. They don't have that in a lot of professional societies because, first of all, you're around people that are in that network. So if you're looking for a job in TechComm in the Carolinas, that's those are the folks that are in that network, right? They're hiring managers, they know hiring managers. That, is incredibly important benefit. Just, being around the sort of water cooler with other people in this field and learning from them, because that's hard to come by, right? You can go on LinkedIn and just meet strangers in TechComm and try to start up a conversation. That's hard, but there's events and not just like regional communities, but there's also the SIGs, right? So any of the special interest groups that the society facilitates, those are great too. And they all put on tons and tons of free educational resources. You can go in, network, learn from people. And of course, education. I'm a big proponent of education because it is important. Just talking to people who have experience, who want to share that knowledge is incredibly valuable. Wherever you can get it, STC, your local university, education is incredibly important in a knowledge-driven field like this. So don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah, and just to follow up with that, STC also has an open Slack group that has different channels. And I meant to mention one of them earlier when you all were talking about how to build a portfolio or how to get samples for, when you're interviewing. There's a volunteer group in that, or a channel in that Slack work group that is for people who are looking for some free documentation, free help that you could maybe build something with. So even if you're not an STC member, I recommend joining our Slack and LinkedIn groups, because for networking purposes, it's just open and you can ask questions. And I've always found STC to be super friendly, and nobody ever makes anyone feel silly for asking any questions. So definitely use those resources. And I see Aaron's posted in the chat. So Christina, what's your favorite besides communities?
Also, I really like our Slack. I'm so glad we have that. I was going to say Intercom is actually one of my favorite resources. I've written 2 articles for the Intercom, which was super scary because I used to think, who am I? I don't know anything. I'm not a researcher. I'm just a practitioner. Nobody cares what I think. But my first one was I co-authored with Dr. Liz Herman, and that gave me the confidence to do another one. And I co-authored one with Dr. Getto. So now I feel like I could write one for myself. And I really like that because I see some of my friends and colleagues who post their knowledge, and it's a really well done journal. And honestly, I'm kind of a printing nerd. The paper is really nice. I just like to play the paper is just very smooth. I know that's very strange, but I love getting in the mail because I'm like, yes, this is the best magazine. I like the paper and everything. The other thing is the summit. It's in our 70th summit this coming year. I am on the summit committee, and I'm very excited to be going to Atlanta this year in May. And I love seeing people that I know and meeting new people and going to all the education sessions. I think we have one of the better conferences in the industry. So those are my 2 favorite.
Well, and you mentioned Dr. Liz Herman. She and Jane Wilson were here in the office on Friday putting the program together for the summit, and people are getting told right now if they were accepted. Woo! So that's very exciting. And we're
checking my email right now.
Yeah, we're keeping our registration open a little bit longer for the very first advantage, the lowest rate on the summit. So if you are interested, it will stay open for a few more days. So, if you want to get the lowest rate. So, and Aaron's putting more links for everybody.
I also want to plug the corporate value program, which I'm actually a member of. I spearhead it every year, and I reach out to all the technical writers at my company, and I'm like, hey, company's going to pay for your membership. Just tell me you want to join and what community you want to join. And it's sort of like just having that is so much better than not having that, especially when your company can pay for it. So, and the fact that we get a bit of a discount because we have so many people join really works for our professional development budget too.
Yeah, and I found some companies, the technical writers are very siloed across different divisions. And this is a way for you to get everybody together, behind one effort, which I think is great in a corporate company. So thank you. Looking to see if there are any questions in the chat. I don't see any. Do you guys have any final comments you'd like to make about conquering fears? Any last words of advice?
I will just say that, it's funny. I'm honestly one of the most fearful people on the planet. People don't believe this about me, but I actually am. I have a lot of anxiety, professional anxiety. And so I like to tell people, if I can get to this point where I can do things, talk to people in panels like this, and know some stuff and feel like a little bit of an expert, then you can too. It just takes effort, right? People like Christina and myself have just been at this a while longer, and that's where confidence comes from. It comes from, figuring stuff out. But we spend a lot of time tinkering, as Christina said, breaking stuff and then trying to fix it. And that's okay. That's part of the learning process. And so you have to allow yourself to fail sometimes to get better. And if you never try, you'll never get any better. So that's the thing with this field. You got to get out there, be a self-starter and fail sometimes, and that's okay.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Giuseppe. I think that there are times when failure actually is the thing that makes you learn something. And I also think, you said you have a lot of anxiety about your professional life. I think everyone does that. But I think once you start getting in a profession and knowing more people, they sort of boost you up as well, so that network that you can build of people that you can talk to that are friendly. And when you go to a conference, everybody there's nothing better than that feeling.
Nope.
So, okay. And Christina, any last comments?
Yeah, actually, Giuseppe has good advice for the newbies, which is don't be afraid to fail. My advice is more for the veterans in the room, which is sometimes you can get into this rut or this belief that you're the technical writer, there's more devs, there's more techie people than writers. So you feel like you have to do everything, right? You have to do the audience analysis, you have to do the drafts, you have to do the publishing. But really, when you become mid-level and up, you should start to think of yourself as a consultant and start to build a culture of documentation within your sphere of influence, because you can't do everything yourself. That is a recipe for burnout, and that is not how documentation should work. So I have switched to teaching my developers how to write and to come to me with questions and act more like a consultant, and coaching them through the documentation lifecycle instead of just saying, oh, just let me do it. I can do it better anyway and faster. But it's kind of like teaching kids. I've got young ones, so it takes longer, it takes more patience, and it probably would be higher quality. But in the long run, you're teaching your developers that documentation is important, it has value, it's real work, and it should be done. It should be part of the definition of done. And over time, they start coming to you, seeing you as the expert that you are. And that's when the real winning happens. And I've reached that point in my career, and it's the best feeling.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, because it's so easy to say, only I will do this the best way.
Yeah.
But when you get into a certain point in your career, it becomes important for you to give back and teach others too. So I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I find that it's really easy to just say, I'm going to just do it all. But then you're right, you're going to burn out and nobody's learning from you. So you aren't giving back to the other people in your profession. And I think those people who get higher up in the field or have been in it for a long time, that's the exact way to develop, as you said, almost a consultant personality or a persona of someone who's an expert. So thank you. Well, thank you everyone for attending today. I'm going to give you a few minutes back of your hour, unless there are any other questions for our panelists. Thank you, Dr. Getto and Christina Mayr, for being here today. It's been a fantastic conversation. You're great experts on this. I appreciate you sharing your own personal fears and failures with us. And I'll give it back to Erin just for some final words of information. Erin, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I was just unmuting. Yes, thank you for joining in today. On the slide, you'll see just a quick sum up of the links that I've been sharing in the chat of how to connect to us. And we do ask that you please do. We don't want this to be the last time we hear from you. And if you have something that gnaws on you a little bit later down the road, please reach out to Guiseppe or Christina. They'll be more than happy to help you answer any of the questions that you might have. The link that I shared about connecting to Slack will allow you to not only find a link to our Slack workspace, but also our major social media platforms. So if you are a member of those, we ask you to connect to us as well, just so you can start to get information about STC if you are not yet connected, or if you are not yet connected to us in that way, please do. And lastly, I want to share that we will be having one more Knowledge Exchange panel discussion happening in 2022, and it'll happen the Monday after the Thanksgiving holiday. So if you've gotten all your turkey in and you're ready to get back into learning for that final month of the year, we'll be holding a panel discussion. The topic is still being finalized, but we hope that we will see you there. And also we'll have a new member meetup. So for those who are new to STC or who are new to the profession, and you just want to have just meet other seasoned professionals or other professionals like yourself, please feel free to catch up with us at our next new member meetup and our panel discussion. And information about both programs will be at that link on the page, which I will also drop in the chat for those who are still in the space. But thank you all for coming today. Thank you to our panelists and to Liz, who did this fantastic topic, and I hope you learned something from it. Have a happy Halloween, and we'll see you next time.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.